Hello, everyone. My name is Reuben Thomas, and I'm a member of St. Gregorio's Elmhurst here in Chicago. And today I'm joined with Deacon Reuben Thomas from Dallas. And welcome to Chaiyya Chats. Jamachan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Sherwin.
Thank you. So the main topic of today's episode is we're going to be talking about balancing the American social life. And so obviously, Jamachan, this is something that is very pertinent to a lot of our youth today, especially our college youth, just because they're constantly fighting two battles of being Indian and being an Orthodox Christian, but also trying to kind of navigate the trials and tribulations of being here in America today. Um, and so, we're definitely very interested to kind of hear your thoughts on the topic and how, we can assist our youth in that matter.
Sure. And again, thank you for having me. I know it's been a while since we're doing Chaiyya
Mhm.
Chats, but I'm really happy to see that we're bringing it back. And to be honest, it's my first time on this side of the questions. But thank God. And the topic that we're talking about, I think it's a very important one, as you mentioned, because there always seems to be this struggle, and we feel it more strongly when we're going to college and when we are perhaps moving away from home.
Mhm.
But this idea that how are we supposed to live our lives and what informs us on how we live our life?
Mhm.
As you mentioned, there are cultural influences that we've grown up with. There is the society and the world around us that tells us how we should live. And hopefully, our faith is telling us how we should live too. And it seems that when we move outside of our comfort zone or outside of our sheltered area where we grew up, then all of these things start to come into our minds, into our hearts, and starts to pull us in all of these different directions.
Mhm.
And this is what you're introducing here is this topic of how to balance our life in this society and how are we supposed to know what the best way to go about that is.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely something that is very tough to manage for a lot of the things that you kind of outlined, and even just speaking from like some of my own experiences, like I feel like in today's day and age, uh, you know, we constantly we're grappling with that because there's so many outside things telling us why it's bad to be Christian, and we can even take that down to a more granular level and look at orthodoxy. But even just being Christian in 2024, I feel like for a lot of us, regardless of our age, it can be very challenging. There's a lot of different discussions and things like that taking place in the world today um, that have caused there to be a very negative perception at large on Christianity. And so that can also, I think, compared to points in the past, can be an extra hurdle or trial, difficulty for people who are trying to be Christian in today's day and age is navigating that when there's just so much more hate and vitriol being espoused towards us when a lot of times we're just trying to do our best to get by.
Right. And that seems to be the trend now that
Mm-hmm.
you've mentioned. And of course, when we say this, it may seem that we're biased
Mm-hmm.
about how Christianity is viewed, but it really does seem in society
Mm-hmm.
how Christianity is seen in the world. And there's probably centuries of negative history
Mm-hmm.
that's informing the world today on how to look at Christianity. But it does seem to be the case where if you're openly Christian, if you're openly faithful as a Christian, you're opening the door to be mocked, to be ridiculed, to be put down in a way. And this is something that we see very specifically within all of Christianity. And it's very interesting to then see how all of these other different faiths, um, there doesn't seem to be this reception towards them or this response to them, whether that's uh, whether that's Hinduism or Islam or Judaism. In a way, a lot of those times, people of those faiths are okay promoting that they are faithful or that they are religious. It's never mocked, it's almost embraced and celebrated.
Mm-hmm.
But whenever there seems to be an opportunity to mock Christianity or to put it down, it seems as if the world is okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then to the question of, well, how are we supposed to deal with that? Not just in our response to what we see the world doing, or the world reacting towards Christianity, but how are we supposed to then live our lives in that sphere? And this is where the question comes of, do we live our Christian life in this world? And this is something that brings up the term secularism,
Mm.
right? To be secular or to be worldly, to be things or to be concerned with things of the world. And this idea of secularism is something that I think has plagued our Orthodox Church very much, especially in this country, especially for those who grow up in this country. And that's not just within our Indian Orthodox community. I think we could say that about any Orthodox jurisdiction and really most Christian denominations within this country. This idea of separating our life of faith
Mhm.
and our life outside of the faith,
Mhm.
as if there is a divide, as if we need to hide something that is personal and intimate to us and express something else to the world, for the world to see, and for people to see only the outside of what we present to them, the external image as sorts. But what is really important to us tends to be hidden away. And this becomes a struggle. If we're trying to live a life of faith, then if I'm living here and I'm living faithfully in the church and I'm involved, and especially going through high school and there's ministries in the church happening, and then I move to college and I start to be distracted by all these influences. Now, what kind of life am I living inside and promoting? And there's this struggle there.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's interesting, kind of to your point. When we're looking at secularism and hiding our true identity, it's ironic almost. Like, one of our primary callings as Christians is to go out and spread the word, and in today's day and age, that's almost a taboo. Uh, we are very much called to do by the world to do essentially the opposite. Uh, Keep those things to ourselves. Like you said, kind of craft this mask of what is politically correct to um, discuss in certain contexts. So, for example, if you're talking about in school, or to a larger degree, for our young adults and beyond, in the workplace, it's becoming increasingly more and more uh, taboo to touch on certain topics. Like, let's avoid religion. Let's avoid politics and these sensitive topics because everyone is so diverse. And it's ironic because the whole premise of then diversity is to become more inclusive and understanding of other cultures. But we're at the same time eliminating those conversations altogether.
Right. We're tolerable as much as we want to be.
Yeah.
Right. And that's, as you said, the irony. And I'm sure when you're in the working environment,
Mm-hmm.
you experience this too. Not just when you're in college;
Mm-hmm.
it keeps going. I'm sure you've had those experiences yourself, where as soon as you say you're a Christian or
Mm-hmm.
people know you're a Christian, there tends to be a shift now on
Yeah.
how maybe they treat you, how they speak to you. Is that something that you've experienced?
Yeah, I can definitely speak for myself that that's something that I've ran into in the workplace specifically. Um, it's funny, like, I've noticed this, like, over the course of my life, this arc, for lack of a better term, in terms of how people respond to certain things. So, for example, when you're in elementary school and beyond, and you watch TV and you watch Disney Channel, all this stuff, like, the kind of perceptions created by these shows we watch is like, oh, like, this is what's cool, this is what's not cool, and we have to follow certain things because everyone cares about how you act, and the whole idea of being popular, right? And then you get to high school and then college, and people start to mature and they start to care less, and you realize, oh, I can go about my life doing my own thing. And I've noticed that it was, at least from my experience, kind of a weird reversal in the workplace. um, no one's going to outwardly ever persecute me in a workplace, because at the end of the day they don't want to lose their job, right? But I've noticed that, again, like, going back to a previous point of yours, that it seems as if with Christianity specifically, is almost considered more acceptable to diminish it, but not with the other religions and things like that. To that point, I think part of it is definitely an aspect of, there's a large population of Christians, not necessarily just Orthodox, but just all denominations. There's a lot of Christians in America, so people have some kind of connection to that, and I think due to that, they are more comfortable criticizing it. And so, again, going then to experiences I ran into, where Nowadays you have various denominations of Christianity that are very outspoken about a lot of social issues. They're very outspoken about these hot button topics like abortion or LGBTQ or whatever the case may be. And regardless of how you feel about that, there's now a connotation being associated with the entire religion, um, of how all of its members must be. And therefore, me as a Christian am then looked at with a different perception by my peers in the workplace, because I think that because I'm Christian, I then must be uh, an inwardly hateful person and one who wants to control other people's lives, wants to be constantly spewing hate. And so I think it's definitely like an intriguing but concerning dynamic there, where it kind of like you have this up and down of people caring what you do and what you don't do, and now I'm in this place where they care, and it's a very uncomfortable setting that I'm sure a lot of people face.
And that's, I think, what you bring up is a really important point of what does it mean to, at least if we focus on orthodoxy,
Mm-hmm.
Orthodox Christianity, um, what does it then mean to believe in certain things when you're approached about, as you said, some of these hot button topics,
Mm-hmm.
things that are social issues, things that can be very emotional or personal for some. And then if you are labeled as a Christian or if you are openly Christian, then when people connect those dots with these issues, these social issues, or these very controversial subjects, there's an assumption that this is how you feel.
Mm-hmm.
So then, if this is how you feel about something, or this is what you believe, then this is how you treat people.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that, as it goes back to the point of we're supposed to be in the society today, everyone is supposed to be inclusive,
Yeah.
and diversity of thought and opinion is supposed to be celebrated. But there seems to be uh, a conflict that when somebody has an opinion or thought that goes counter to what culture or society teaches, then that person is in the wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of what drives this for the Christian is now this pressure from the outside world to
Mm-hmm.
conform, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or this pressure from the outside world to hide,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or to feel almost defensive in a way of
Yeah.
what we believe. And there is this idea that we hear from St. Paul, where he says that we have to speak the truth in love, right? Even if we do that perfectly, which sometimes we struggle to do
Mm-hmm.
that, we fail at either speaking the truth or doing it in a loving way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but even if we are able to speak the truth in love, to live our truth in love with each other, then, and when I say live our truth, I mean the truth of Christ,
Mm-hmm.
right? Not our own personal truths.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Even if we do that in a way that's proper and healthy, it's not always received in love. And it's not always received as truth. And when it's not received in those ways, then do we feel the pressure to then change
Mm-hmm.
how we present it, to change what we believe? Um, or do we feel pressured to go to the church and say, why doesn't the church teach what the world is teaching me?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because what is our idea of truth and morality? Where does these things come from? And if these things come from what society tells us they should be, then we're going to find a conflict with what the church teaches, right? And I know that's going to be a topic for a later session on maybe some of specifically these controversial subjects. But when we talk about this idea of living our life, balancing our life in this world, a lot of it comes down to facing these pressures from the world and from our peers, hence the term peer pressure, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's especially then kind of leads us to uh, a, a separate area where we're looking at now. How does that really affect our youth? I think this is kind of a aspect of what we're talking about that is obviously very prevalent for that middle school, high school, college age group, as well as many others. But obviously, that's one of the areas we see it the most. And again, it kind of goes back to this idea of wanting validation. We're constantly seeking validation. And it's interesting because, you know, kind of like you were referring to, at the end of the day, God is the end all be all for us. our salvation with Christ is the end all be all for us. So that's the only vindication, validation, whatever you want to call it, that we need. And yet we're constantly seeking that from our peers and willing to then conform, willing to then cast aside what's really important and what's at stake for these short term gains.
Mhm. And I'm glad you brought up that term validation,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you said it. If God, if Christ is the one who validates us,
Mm-hmm.
then that should be enough.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is, in theory, we can say that. We do say that. We want to believe that.
Right.
Um, but when we're in those situations, when we're in our social groups or friend groups, and we have the maybe the unpopular opinion, the counter opinion, or the belief that goes against what everybody else believes and
Mm-hmm.
thinks, and then we are now by ourselves and we're isolated and we're alone in our faith or truth. In the truth of what our church teaches,
Mm-hmm.
then we can say God is the one who validates us.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really hard to go through that struggle of feeling very lonely and feeling very alone and feeling cut off from your friends and from everybody else. And that's a very painful thing to go through. So, yes, we can say, you know, in one sense that we fold very quickly to conform to the group. But it's really hard to, especially when you go to college and when you're forming your friend groups, it's really hard when the moments come where you might find yourself separated from that group. And I think that speaks to a larger issue at hand within our society, that it's hard for us to be alone sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard for us when we go through stages of where we feel lonely,
Mm-hmm.
and how do we deal with that emotion and that feeling, and where do we get our sense of presence and community from,
And
right?
I think that's an interesting point too, because what I immediately thought of when you brought that up too is, within the Malayali community, we're often, whether taught explicitly or just kind of implicitly, conditioned to keep to ourselves when we're struggling. We don't want others around us to know what we're going through. So we're conditioned to bottle things up. And now, obviously nowadays, um, there has been more of a push, obviously, for mental health and things like that, and being willing to seek out a spiritual father, a parent, a chachin or chechi, some kind of friend or peer, to somebody to share that struggle with you. Kind of in the way that Christ shares our struggle. Look for that in somebody around us and surround us with that, um, so that we're not alone. And yet, at the same time, right, there's a struggle of sometimes you are going to be alone. Sometimes you're in situations or contexts where no one around you is proclaiming the truth, and yet you know what the truth is, and everything around you is making you question that. But at the same time, a core part of your being knows what really is the truth, and it really is a struggle, to your point of one being able to reach a point where you finally accept that and that you are going to be alone, and then understanding how to then navigate that journey alone.
Right. And I think that when we talk about peer pressure
Mm-hmm.
and then the pressure to then be with the group or the pressure of being alone,
Mm-hmm.
that's a really difficult thing to handle. Part of it stems from our own insecurities,
Mm-hmm.
right? What are we insecure about? Are we insecure about what we say or what we think or what people might think about us?
Mm-hmm.
And then if we are feeling that way, it's going to be easy to go into the group. But if we are okay having our own opinion and standing up for what we believe in, and it's not in a way that's hateful and it's not in a way that casts judgment on anybody
Mm-hmm.
else, it can be in a way that says, this is what I grew up with. This is what I believe to be the truth that Christ gives us about himself and about how we understand each other and how we understand how and why we were created to live in this world, to live in this world for the next,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if we understand these things and if we are secure in our belief in that, then we enter into this phase of we might be alone. Like you said, we might be the only person standing on that belief or that faith when everyone else says, the opposite.
Hmm.
And I think there are two sides to this of, how do we not feel so alone, which I think we will get to that. But then there's the idea that sometimes we will be alone, right? Sometimes as a Christian in this world, you will feel alone. And really, the model for that is something that we see uh, in Scripture. We see that as one of the core things within our faith, and that is the model of Christ, right? Many times when Christ is in his public ministry and he's teaching the gospel, teaching the faith to the people, very much, he is isolated in what he is teaching. Everybody else seems to be against him, right? It seems to be that he is on his own. And we see this nowhere else more clearly except the cross, right? We see that Christ at the height of loneliness, we could say, at the height of loneliness, when his friends have left him, when he's been betrayed by everyone, when he's been mocked and he's been, put up to die. And in that moment, in the height of loneliness, the idea isn't to get rid of the loneliness and to get rid of the isolation. And sometimes we want to ignore those things or run away from those things.
Hmm.
There is an idea that, well, if we are Christians and the idea is we want to live like Christ, then like Christ, sometimes we do have to embrace that loneliness and not be overcome by it, but to overcome it, right? And that comes back to our understanding of how to live our faith. Our identity is rooted in Christ. Our belief is rooted in Christ. Everything that we do comes from Him. And if we have that sense, then we know that, yes, between me and the persons around us, we may not see eye to eye on everything. We may not be on the same page. But we know that there is something larger than this circle of friends that we have, than this moment that we live in. That if we believe Christ is always with us in all things and holds faithful to us in all things, then that should give us a sense of hope and a sense of belonging to someone else, even when physically we may be alone. Because I will say this, even if we conform to the group, if we feel insecure and we do give in to what others are doing and to what others are saying, we may be part of the group, but in our hearts and our souls, we will feel very alone still. Even though we haven't left anyone, we could be in a big group together, but we might be the only ones who are feeling the emotions that we feel in that moment. Feelings of insecurity, feelings of fear, feelings of betrayal, that we have betrayed ourselves, feelings of doubt of what do I actually believe. And while everybody else is okay and happy to be together as a group, we are still very much on our own, right? And so this becomes this a struggle of loneliness of what do I give in? What do I not give into? And I would say sometimes, like you said, it's okay to be alone sometimes. This is what our Lord does, right? And obviously, that's not the end. He doesn't stay alone, right? But there are moments where that may happen in our life. And we have to embrace them and try to overcome them in the right ways. Um, and I think there is a way to do that in our Christian life, but it's not something that people really want to face because that is a difficult struggle. We should acknowledge that too.
Yeah, and I think it's something that when you look at the context of maybe a college student, I think it's something that speaking as obviously two people who've kind of been through that experience here in America of going through that college experience, um, that's something that sometimes you can have a feeling out process for over the course of 4 years. So speaking for myself, right, and some of my peers, like, it's very tempting to want to do a lot of the things that college kids do once you first enter college, especially freshman, sophomore year. It's very tempting to want to go to parties and drink and hang out with peers and whatever the case may be. But kind of to your point of, you know, conforming to the group and yet still not feeling whole. I think that's something that a lot of college kids start to feel out. And, at times that is kind of a juncture where the path diverges and that individual will either go full force into what they're doing and it can consume them, or they understand this really truly isn't for me, this is not benefiting me, and they step away. Um, and that's definitely a very real struggle. Is one, however that whatever shape that journey takes for each individual, getting to that point and then understanding, how to proceed from there. But I also just want to add then, going back to your other point, um, you know we have to work hard to try and recognize and embrace every opportunity to strengthen ourselves and to grow. And so, one of the things that I always refer back to is a lesson in my 10th or 11th grade Sunday school class where we talk about doubt. And it's interesting because, within the context of our community, a lot of times doubt is immediately portrayed as a very bad, negative thing. A lot of times our parents, um, they get scared by us doubting, right? And so, when we start to ask questions rather than giving answers, some parents may have a tendency to get angry. And that's not their fault. That's just kind of how they're conditioned. But what that lesson really gets at is that doubt can be a tool, a really strong tool if you manage it properly. It's an opportunity to engage with your faith on a deeper level by choosing to ask questions about things you don't understand or that you may initially not agree with, so that you can truly understand it and strengthen yourself as an individual, strengthen yourself as an Orthodox Christian, and understand the faith better. So, kind of applying it again, then that concept to what we're talking about, um, whether it's college kids or beyond, or high school kids, whoever, we should really, really strive, to your point, to embrace those opportunities where we are going to doubt, where we're going to falter, where we don't know what to do, because those are opportunities to sharpen ourselves and really have the potential to just take off from there and really see a huge jump in our spiritual growth if we manage that properly. Yeah, and I think that brings us to, a good stopping point for today, Jamachin. We thank everybody for watching and listening. We're going to continue this conversation on our next episode, so stay tuned for that. And make sure to follow us on YouTube and Spotify, and keep those notifications ready. We'll be with you soon.